My talk is called Design Wants to Be Free, and I took, as I usually do, very literally the charge of the conference organizers to talk about, they list some things in their introduction that they hope the panels will be about, and so you'll see I've been very literal. I also want to really thank the panel organizers for inviting me and for their patience with some, subpar behavior on my part. So thanks for not giving up on me. All right. So the framing, I would say, of this talk is that Americans have always been kind of terrible copycats. And I mean that in the third grade sense of you copied off of me. Yeah, we do that a lot. And we especially, until copyright laws changed in 1891 and then in 1909, and we can talk about that, what those changes were in greater detail later if you want. Americans were, copycats of foreign writings and images and designs, all three of those things. Pretty regular copycats. So you may have heard of that stereotype, Henry Cole and other 19th century English design reformers, for example, used to sort of complain about how much Americans copied stuff, British stuff, for example. So American publishers prioritized, so I'm talking about publishers first, and then I'll talk about design. But the publishing part of it until 1891 or 1909, it's pretty important for the 19th century that you could copyright this foreign written material and printed material. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that. American publishers they did not have to pay royalties. They could just pirate stuff, basically. I mean, it wasn't exactly piracy. It was more like privateering because it was legally sanctioned. But Charles Dickens, you may know, complained bitterly about Americans ripping off his works and not paying him any royalties. So we did the same thing for Ruskin, who refused, there were these things called courtesy of the trade, and you could actually negotiate with one of the big publishers in the US. You could negotiate a kind of exclusive deal, and other kind of big publishers would agree not to infringe. And there were royalty agreements with English authors. It's just Ruskin was so picky about the way his books were published that he refused to let any American publishers be that agent in the US, and so that opened him up to just complete piracy. So Ruskin, for example, John Ruskin, the English design theorist, there were dozens of editions of most of his major works published in the United States, and Roger Stein has cataloged a whole bunch of them long ago. But those were routinely ripped off. Here's an example. For general audiences, I think I would say that the principle is low cost trumps fidelity. So that's not to say that there aren't some kind of nice copies. This is two photos, unfortunately not side by side, so the scale, it's hard to tell the scale. In fact, the left one, which is the English edition, is a little bit larger than the right one, which is the American edition. But you can see that the pagination is different, right? There's the images on the verso in the English and on the recto in the American edition. And if you look closely at things such as the look at these roundels and see how they're different. They're not exactly the same. They didn't try super hard to make them exactly the same. It's close enough because it's medieval Venetian architecture. Nobody's gonna copy this to make a new piece of furniture. But as you'll see, when it is important, they do copy it exactly. So another example would be William Morris's book, News from Nowhere, at the Ransom Center at UT Austin. For example, the left-hand one with that nice vellum case, that would be the William Morris Kelmscott edition. The one on the right with the cloth-bound cheap case would be the American edition. Often these books are they can do it within weeks. They basically pay people off in England to get the advanced sheets, and then they start copy setting. Typesetting really fast. So within weeks or at most months, there are usually American editions cheap editions of English design theory here. So when the audience, however, is not so much meant, at least initially, to be a general audience, but rather an audience of designers and manufacturers, fidelity becomes more important than price. This is kind of a general principle that I've derived from looking at a bunch of these things. So I think that we're accustomed to thinking of Charles Eastlake's Hints on Household Taste book as a thing that consumers read, and they did. But I gotta tell you, manufacturers also read this, and for them, this is where the fidelity of the images is really important. Fortunately, since most of Eastlake's images are line drawings in black and white, those were easy for skilled wood engravers to reproduce and also easy to do with photo engraving. So there were like two kind of easy processes available to print those, and they would then be relief plates that you could lock up in a chase along with type. Super easy and cheap, relatively speaking, to reproduce. And the same, I think you know what? This is in presentation mode, which I never use, so I'm like, think that I'm on the wrong slide all the time when I'm talking to you. I'm going to try and make that better. Okay, so this is that line image that I'm trying to tell you about that's super easy to copy. There are some color plates in Eastlake, and on the left is the English edition, and on the right is the American edition. I've tried to line them up insofar as I was allowed to in book cradles so you could see the images compared in the right directions, but you'll see again it's a recto verso switch. They don't care about pagination, but they are pretty exact about images and color. They do a pretty good job matching these things when it's important. All right, and the same is true, pardon me. The same is true. Americans went to actually kind of a lot of expense in some cases. This is Walter Crane's book, The 1st of May. I mean, it's a play written by someone else that Walter Crane made these elaborate, lovely pencil drawings to illustrate. I don't think anybody read the play. Nobody bought this book for the play. You can get cheap editions of the play. The folio, which I've tried to indicate the size of it by putting my glasses here, it's about this tall. It's enormous. It's this huge leather-bound gold tool. You know, I mean, it's the full deal. When you open it up, though, can you still understand me? Okay, I'm not sure it'll help, but thank you. That's very kind. Okay, when you open, so here they are side by side. This is the English edition. Here's the American edition, much smaller, right? They don't care so much about fidelity to the size. But if you look at the actual size of the images, there are very generous margins here. The ones in the American edition are not that much smaller. Honestly, they're a little bit smaller, but not much. And this whole book, because these were pencil drawings, it's the firm of Goupil, or however you say that, that did the English images, but it's a Boston publisher, Osgood, who makes the American edition. And all of the plates are made by heliotype, which is a new photographic process. So every single page is a photograph that's glued in both editions, actually. And the only difference between them, there's some color correction things I need to do here, but I didn't. You can see that the title pages are exactly the same, except, oh, wait, this one says, hey, James R. Osgood on the front. But otherwise, they are photographically, and every single plate they've gone through and gotten rid of the printed by, J. Goupil, and, either, I don't think they replaced it. I think they just got rid of it to not make it seem like they were forging. They weren't forging, they were just copying. But the really funny thing about this particular book is there's a review of it that is published in an art journal in which the author says, and people who are gearing up for those Christmas card competitions will find much on offer, in this book. Basically, they make it really clear, hey, if you're a printer of Christmas cards or you're in any way involved in design or the decorative arts, you're going to want this one to copy from. It's a super clear quotation. I mean, it doesn't quite come out and say it, but it's pretty clear. That's what they imagine this to be used for. That's why the expense of these photographic illustrations is worth it. So again, when it's made for people who are designers or manufacturers, the standards of copying change. So here's an example of, on the left is the William Morris Kelmscott edition of Dante Gabriel Rossetti's booklet story, Hand and Soul. On the right is an American edition by Thomas B. Mosher. He was known as the Pirate of Portland, Maine, Portland, Maine, because he made lots of reprints of English editions, but he particularly specialized in making really high quality, they're not exactly facsimiles, but they're kind of close to being facsimiles of William Morris Kelmscott Press editions. So this is the opening pages of those two books. And you can see that Mosher, for reasons I don't know why, has in fact made a big red eye that is not present in the original. So there are some changes like this, but on the whole, it's like quite faithful. And the really most glorious instance of an American publisher making a reprint of like a really expensive book is this one. It's J.W. Vuitton, who I think his offices must have been kind of right around here. I haven't looked, but I remember seeing it was southeast side of Manhattan. It must be right around here, back in the mid-1800s. This is on the right, the 1880 American edition of the Quarto London edition, which is on the left, of Owen Jones's Grammar of Ornament. So, first there's a big folio Owen Jones one. Then there's a Quarto edition that's published a little later in a more affordable format, both in London. And then Vuitton in 1880 rips it off. Like, he reprints the whole thing. It's all retypeset. Though it actually took me a little bit to figure out. I had to look really closely and look at, oh, wait, that word is on a different line. I mean, that kind of really close comparison to make sure that, in fact, it had been retypeset. At first, I thought it was some kind of photographic process. But these over 100 chromolithographs, which each have anywhere from like 4 to 8 or 9 different colors on them, different stones or plates. Each one of those had to be reproduced, but there's no photographic method in 1880 for basically making color reproductions like this. You had to have the skilled people, the lithographers, actually make entirely new plates by hand. And both editions, I will say, the only place I know of where you can see both editions side by side is the Watson Library at the Met. So I spent like a day paging through and looking at them side by side. It's actually, you have to work at it. You sometimes see differences in colors, but to see differences where they've made mistakes in the patterns is actually, they did a good job. I was surprised because it's important. The reason Vuitton is doing this is because the import tariffs on imported books are so high that a book that's already a really expensive book like this one, when you add like these ad valorem tariffs to it I don't know the tariff rate offhand for books in 1880, but let's just guess that it's about 50%, somewhere between 35 and 50. Could have been more, actually, probably at least 50. It would have been too expensive. So Vuitton is his real day job. He's not a publisher, really. He's a book importer, and he specializes in rare imprints and also in art and design books. So that's a guy who absolutely could have done the math and said, you know what, I can reproduce it cheaper in the US than I can import it. And there's going to be a market for this because there's all these art schools and design schools and manufacturers and designers who are going to really want to steal a lot of ideas from this book. So even after copyright laws changed, after 1891, foreigners could register copyrights here, but oh my God, it was still, like, for practical purposes, kind of really impossible, really challenging and difficult. You had to have a seriously coordinated effort with someone on these shores, and you still had to print everything with American-made plates. So you couldn't just, like, bring the plates over from England. Nope, they had to be retypeset and remade here. So 1909 is when you really much more easily, as a foreigner, can copyright stuff here. You still have to do the American-made plates, though. Anyway, so that kind of dries up, and I have ideas about why is American design of the teens and 20s so conservative? Because we got cut off. We couldn't copy so much stuff as maybe we had been so freely. But there's still plenty of copying going on, because Americans can still copy each other. There's nothing stopping them. I mean, not the written stuff and not the images, but they can copy the actual designs. Like, they can look in Gustav Stickley's catalog, and they can be like, hey, I can make me a table like that. I own a table that looks almost like this and almost like the one that his brothers ripped off from him that's on the right, but it's not exactly the same as either of those. Like, believe me, I have tried so hard to figure out who made the table we own, and it's not exactly either of these. But people could make exact replicas of lots of these things, or very close replicas, without problems. So I would say even this trend of copying accelerated in the modern period, especially. I mean, arts and crafts, there's a reason why that stuff gets copied too, which we can come back to maybe in questions. But modern design also it's particularly susceptible to copying because it doesn't have ornamental components under US law. If you want to get a design patent to protect, you can't copyright useful things with copyright law in the US. It's different from most places in Europe. if you want to protect it and it's a useful thing, you've got to get a design patent. And you really, after 1905, can't get a design patent unless the thing has something ornamental about it. And it also has to be novel. It can't be like kind of a remake of something that's already known. So, for example, Hans Knoll of Knoll International, the furniture people, there's a long story here I could tell you about how hard that man tried to get some kind of design protection for the Hardoy or the butterfly or the BKF chair in this country. He was stymied at every turn, so he made a crazy, like, Hail Mary attempt to get trademark protection or unfair competition kind of protection under state law for it, which failed because at that point, there are like in the 1950s, two container configurations that are protected by trademarks. There's a liquor bottle and there's the Coca-Cola bottle. Those are the first two like shape marks. It was a lot longer before you could do something like that with an actual product configuration and protect it with with trademarks, trademark law. So what this means is this is not an Eames chair. I thought it was because it's actually like made out of fiberglass. It's not like the polypropylene they use today. It's like the real fiberglass deal. It's all chippy and cracked. You know how they get all sharp and banged up. Nope. I was cleaning these to take them out of the grad studio and put them in my office. And I turned it over. And it's made in Green Bay, Wisconsin by Kruger Furniture. You know, I'm like, whoa. And I'm pretty sure it's old. It's not a recent copy because it's been banging around in there for at least 20 years. Similarly, this is not a Saarinen chair. This is like a copy of a Saarinen chair that you can get for, I think, $119. You can look it up. You can buy the original for not quite 10 times this price, or you can buy this copy in the U.S. And I mean, look up actually, when I was coming in, even though I was late, I did turn over one of those Arne Jacobsen chairs because I was like, wait, did they spring for the Fritz Hansen authorized versions? Or are these like a low budget American version or Chinese version? Y'all sprung for the Fritz Hansen. I'm impressed, but you didn't need to. Not for me, at least. Okay, so anyway, the point is industry groups have lobbied for decades for stronger protections. If you think back to the 1920s and you know about the American Union of Decorative Artists and Craftsmen, or AUDAC, they lobbied. Also, today, like Design Within Reach, and they're part of an industry group that's the Be Authentic group, and there's a website for them that you can look at. I've used that website. Are you ready? It's shameful. Maybe not. Like my chair once was like, hey, do you know where I could get some cheap copies of those George Nelson slat benches? Because we got to like spruce up our facilities before NASAD comes. And I was like, oh, check the Be Authentic site because they like out shameful copies. You'll be able to find a manufacturer and like figure out where to order those. So, I mean, I'm using it for the wrong purposes, but they attempt to show you these like cheap copies and you're supposed to be embarrassed and shamed for making them, but you can use it for other purposes. So anyway, why are we such jerks? We're not. These are the two questions, and I have to finish this. Who sets the rules within a design field? Designers, clients, consumers, or users? That was one of the things in the program, right? So my answer is none of the above. Who does? Like, who is it that's setting these rules of design, changing them, breaking them? Guess what? It varies by country. But here, it's Congress, it's the courts, and it's government agencies like OSHA. You know, I mean, it's like people you wouldn't necessarily think of, but bureaucrats and administrative law. So I would argue that we have globally quirky intellectual property laws because we don't allow useful things to be copyrighted typically. And those laws have had some serious important impacts on the way that American design looks. First of all, if you, when you've maybe read critics of the past who talk about American design being borax and having rosebuds on it, it's like, why is it so ornamented? You know, it's supposed to be functionalist and sleek. Yeah, no, there's a reason. It's because you can't design patent the functionalist sleek stuff. There has to be something ornamental about it in the 20th century. That's how you get things like streamlining and how you get what Thomas Hine calls populux design, but borax, rosebuds. The Sunbeam Toastmaster, often scorned by the Museum of Modern Art people because it has like decorations and it's streamlined. Yeah, you can design patent something like that. Okay, so the second impact that these laws I think have had is that they've encouraged U.S. manufacturers to use trademarks as an ornamental component in their designs. They didn't think of this idea. I kind of think Louis Vuitton might have been the first one to think of it, because he trademarks the pattern that's used on his luggage in the late 19th century, early 20th century in France. I think this one says 1908, but I think this is a renewal, is my recollection. I don't have a picture of the original. But Americans take this up and run with it. The best example, I would say, is Elbert Hubbard and Roycroft. Why does that guy have those like prominent, hang on. Yeah. Okay, here, you can't really see it. Here, like really prominently on a lot of his furniture, he's got that Roycroft trademark. And same thing with some of these decorative objects. Like here it is. And this one actually, I think it's up here. I can't quite see it. It says Roycroft prominently, the word Roycroft there. Guess what? That guy was a soap industry tycoon. That's where he got his money. That's how you distinguish one brand of soap from another, is you put the name into the bar. The guy figured out that that's how you can't keep someone from copying your pink rose-scented soap, but you can put the name Lux on it, or you can put Larkin on the bar of soap. Hey, that guy figured out you could do the same for furniture. That if you wanted people to pay like extra money to have the expensive Roycroft stuff instead of the cheap Sears copy, it's actually that brand name that's like why you maybe should pay more. So he's using, I think, a technique from the soap industry here. Okay, and third, and I should say, we love this stuff. Oh, come on. No one in the front row has a handbag that's like got... But the Louis Vuitton idea, like we're handbags and, shirts with logos and Gloria Vanderbilt jeans and Nike tennis shoes and like prominent outside trademarks on the outside instead of a label on the inside. Americans love that stuff because it's sometimes the only way you can protect the part of the object that's really the valuable part. The form other people can often copy. You can't, but the trademarks you have forever if you keep using them. Okay, so the third implication of these laws, I would say, is that American design's historically been more innovative in its use of materials and production techniques than European design. I know that's like an old chestnut that like Arthur Poulos and other people, I don't know, Phil Patton, have like Americans, inventive. I'm not that person who's like a boosterish person like that, but I'm telling you, that's one of the things. Hans Knoll, after he got burned on the Hardoy chair, once he lost that case, he stopped producing it. He'd been selling the chair for like $35, and millions of those things were produced at a price of like $5.95 towards the end of their run in the 50s and 60s. You can't maintain those high prices if you don't have the monopoly, the exclusive rights to produce. So Hans Knoll got smart really fast. I mean, he was a European emigre, so he was learning, as many Europeans learned when they came here. Oh my God, the laws don't work the same way at all. I just got my stuff all ripped off. Okay, so Knoll learns fast, and he begins immediately, I would say all the designers in his stable, he encourages them to develop designs that can be utility patented, not design patented, but regular patented, because they're innovative in materials, use of materials, or in techniques, or, there's something ingenious about them. So Saarinen, for example, Eero Saarinen is a great example of someone who patents a technique, not just like one form of a chair, but a technique for generating the form of a chair using conic sections that can be folded. And he has all these patent claims in which, and you can see there's many variations. One patent will protect, these images are both from the same patent. He's showing you, these are examples of the kinds of forms I protect with this process. So they have a wider scope. They're easier to defend. Design patents are terribly hard to defend in the U.S. at the middle of the century. So I'm telling you, Florence Knolls gets a bunch of utility patents. Saarinen gets more of them. I mean, Warren Platner gets them. Knoll uses utility patents as a protection strategy. So anyway, I would say unruly design? Nope, not at all. Everything that Americans are doing, I think, all this copying, it's actually all conditioned by these laws that are based on democratic assumptions and priorities, that copying is a public good, and that if you want democracy to be real and material, then you have to let people of all classes be able to afford nice things. Because if only rich people can have nice designs or nice clothes, that's not so democratic. So Congress and the courts have both ruled a number of times. They've sort of said it in passing in court rulings and things, that the point of allowing copying here is, in fact, to be democratic. So it's a feature, not a bug. Thanks.